What if the smallest person in town carried a strength no one else could see? Dry Creek, New Mexico, early spring of 1878. The sun had only begun climbing above the dust-worn buildings when Clara Winn pushed open the door to Dry Creek General Store. Her boots were scuffed, her hat hung too big over her brow, and the shortened handle of a hoe stuck awkwardly from the bundle on her back. At just 4 feet 6.5, she barely reached the counter, but her eyes stayed steady and unflinching. Inside, the murmurs stopped at once. A tall woman near the barrels whispered, "She's no bigger than a house cat." "And half as useful," a man muttered. Clara didn't react. She stepped forward and placed her items carefully on the counter. A sack of corn seed, a folded piece of canvas, a bundle of kindling, and the hoe shaped to fit her small hands. Mr. Barlow, the storekeeper, peered over his spectacles and raised an eyebrow. "Well now, if it ain't little Miss Winn, what's this? Spring planting?" He lifted the hoe and twirled it. "You planning on digging graves for field mice or bearing sparrows for practice?" Low laughter rose around the room. Clara met his gaze. "I'm planting corn on my land." "That rocky patch up north?" Barlow snorted. "Nothing grows there." "Even the cactus gave up." "Then I'll grow something they don't expect." He chuckled and thumped the hoe on the counter. "This thing weighs half what you do." Clara opened her coin purse and counted out every cent she had. "It'll do." She took the sack, lifted the hoe, and walked out, the laughter following her like dust. She didn't turn back. Outside, she crossed the wooden sidewalk, the bundle heavy across her shoulders. The air carried grit and wind. She was 3 steps away when a shadow moved into her path. Thomas Keene stood there, hat low, boots polished like he wanted the whole street to notice. Son of the Hargrove family, the same family that once took her in out of charity, then abandoned her near the New Mexico border when sickness came and she became too small to be useful. Quote, "Well, look who crawled out of the dirt," Thomas drawled, folding his arms. "Little Clara Winn. Didn't we leave you behind somewhere?" She stepped sideways, but he blocked her. "I heard you claimed land," he said with a grin. "Tell me, are you growing tumbleweeds or trying to get dragged off by coyotes?" "I've got work to do," Clara muttered. Thomas yanked the sack from her grip. The hoe clattered to the ground, seed spilling across the dirt. "Oops," he said. Clara lunged to grab the sack, but he nudged her back with the toe of his boot. "This ain't a place for dolls, Clara. You'll be dead or married to an outlaw before first frost." He laughed, until the air behind him shifted. A new shadow stepped forward, tall, broader than any man in Dry Creek. Silent. Grey Wolf. He didn't speak at first. He just moved past Thomas with slow, steady steps. His hair was braided. A carved necklace lay against his chest, and his dark eyes fixed on the spilled seed like it mattered. Thomas froze. Grey Wolf bent, lifted the hoe with one hand, and handed it to Clara. Then he crouched and scooped the scattered corn back into the torn sack, careful as if collecting gold dust. He stood again, towering over both of them, his voice low and gravel smooth. "The earth does not care how small you are." Thomas took a step back, jaw tight. Grey Wolf turned to Clara and held out the sack. She took it, her fingers brushing his rough palm. "Thank you," she whispered. He didn't answer. He reached to his belt pouch, pulled something out, and placed it gently at her feet. An eagle feather bound in leather. Then he turned and walked toward the ridge without another word. Clara picked up the feather, breath trembling. When she looked up again, Thomas was already walking away. She lifted her chin, adjusted her bundle, and walked out of town with her heart pounding but higher than before. She didn't know his name then, not really. But she felt something settle under her ribs. Not fear, not shame. Possibility. That evening, wind howled through the cottonwoods near the edge of her claim. Clara wrestled with a crooked fence post and lost. Her hands were raw, her back aching. Her shelter was nothing but a leaning frame of warped boards and patched canvas. At night, the wind clawed through it like sharp fingers. She slept curled under her mother's old patchwork quilt, the last piece of family she had left. "You're little, Clara," her mother once said while tucking that quilt around her shoulders. but the wind lifts what it does not crush. And you, my girl, were made to fly. Now the wind only mocked her. Her shovel bounced off a stone again, jolting her arms. She crouched to pry it with her bare hands, frustration knotting tight in her chest. That night, rain crept in through every crack in her shelter. She lay awake, shivering, gripping the quilt with both hands. At dawn, soaked and exhausted, she stepped outside. She stopped. On the flat stone in front of her doorway sat a small wooden bird, carved with such care it seemed almost alive. Under its base, words were burned into the grain. "I saw you." Clara held the bird carefully, warmth spreading through her chilled fingers. She looked toward the distant ridge, knowing without knowing who had been there. She placed the carving gently inside her shelter. 3 mornings later, another storm rolled in. Thunder rumbled across the foothills. Clara scrambled to tie down the canvas. Wind tore it from her hands. She slipped from the crate she stood on and fell hard into the mud. When she pushed herself up, dazed, she saw him. Grey Wolf. He stepped through the rain, silent as stone. Without a word, he anchored the canvas, reinforced the back wall, and secured every rope. Clara pushed wet hair from her face. "Why are you here?" He looked at her, rain drifting across his calm features. "You listen to the ground. You do not fight it. That is worth keeping." "You carved the bird?" she asked. He nodded. "Tiquata, sparrow. Small, but it sings before the storm ends." She stared at him. A stranger who spoke like the wind. A man no one in Dry Creek would dare approach. She stepped inside, grabbed her canteen, and handed it to him. He took one measured sip, then returned it. "I am Grey Wolf," he said. "Tashida, quote." "Clara," she replied. He nodded again. Before turning to leave, he said one thing more. "Build your roots deep, Clara Sparrow, so they do not wash away." Then he was gone, but the fear of the storm had left with him. Something else filled its place. Something warm, something beginning. What if the only person who ever believed in you was the one everyone else feared? The morning sun rose soft and pale over Clara's land. The wind carried the fresh smell of pine drifting down from the ridge. Clara wiped her brow as she tried to drive another fence post into the earth. Her hands burned from yesterday's work, her fingers raw, even beneath the cloth she had wrapped around them. The fence stood uneven, barely waist-high, but it marked something important. Her claim, her effort, her place in the world. She stepped back to catch her breath. That was when she heard the sound behind her. It wasn't hooves, not boots. Softer, controlled. She turned. Grey Wolf walked toward her, carrying a bundle of pine logs across his shoulder like they weighed nothing. The morning light touched the red leather woven through his braids. He stopped just inside the line of stakes she had placed and looked at the fence. "This," he said, tapping one of the posts, "is not strong." Clara lifted her chin. "It's what I can manage." He studied the crooked posts for a long moment, then nodded. "Together is better." Before she could answer, he dropped the logs to the ground and began setting the first one without waiting for permission. Clara hesitated, then grabbed her hammer and fell into step beside him. They worked in a quiet rhythm. He dug and placed the stakes. She braced them, holding the wood with gloved hands. He cut the rails with clean, sharp strokes. She measured the distance between each with her arms. For every task she thought too heavy, Grey Wolf showed her another way. They worked until the sun climbed high, until Clara was panting, sawdust clinging to her hair. "You work too fast," she said, leaning on her hammer. Grey Wolf didn't pause. "You keep up." Clara let out a tired, breathless laugh. "Barely." Quote. They rested beneath the thin shade of a cottonwood tree. Clara sat on a stump, sipping from her canteen. Grey Wolf crouched nearby, sharpening a hand axe with a river stone. His movements were slow, steady, precise. "I was taken once," he said suddenly. Clara blinked. "Taken?" He nodded. "Mission school, far south. They cut my hair, gave me a number instead of a name, said my tongue was wrong, said my gods were wrong, said my ways were wrong." She watched his expression, calm, Not cold, just honest. How old were you? She asked. 10 summers. What happened? I left, he said, escaped through a creek bed in winter, walked 4 days to reach my people again. Clara's breath caught. That must have been terrifying. It was cold, he answered simply. She studied him quietly, the calm lines of his face, the strength in his posture, the steadiness in his voice. She felt something inside her chest soften. I never went to school either, she said. My father taught me to read before he died. After that, I had books, just books and work. Her voice grew smaller. People used to say I was too small, too weak, too much trouble. Pretty little thing, they'd say. Good for nothing. Grey Wolf met her eyes at once. You are not nothing. Clara looked away. Her throat tightened. Sometimes I believed them. He stood, walked to his pack, and returned with something in his hands. Soft deer-hide gloves, worn smooth, stitched by hand. He held them out to her. Wood has splinters, he said. So does pride. Protect your hands, both kinds. She stared at the gloves, then at him. You made these? He nodded. No one has ever given me anything like this, she whispered. You earned it, he replied. You stay, you build. That is rare. They returned to work. The gloves fit perfectly. Together they finished the fence by late afternoon, standing side by side as the sun dipped lower behind the ridge. Grey Wolf folded his arms. This will not last winter. Clara's heart sank. I know. He turned toward her fully. Let me build a cabin. She stared at him. A what? A home. Real walls. A roof that holds weight. A fire that stays. A place to survive. Not just hide. You want to build me a house? She asked in disbelief. He nodded once. Yes. Clara looked at her crooked liento, her quilt drying in the breeze, her hands now wrapped in the gloves he made. A cabin. A real home. Something she never thought she would have. She swallowed hard. I'll think about it. Grey Wolf didn't press. He simply said, I will come when the moon is new. If you say yes, I bring tools. Then he walked off toward the ridge. As she watched him leave, something warm settled in her chest. She wasn't alone anymore. Not really. When the moon was new, he returned. With pine logs balanced across his shoulders, tools strapped to his horse, and a quiet certainty in his eyes. Together they began. The cabin rose slowly. Grey Wolf taught her how to notch the logs so they locked together without nails. He carved perfect joints and tested each log with a push of his hand. Clara worked beside him, dragging bark, fetching tools, sawing where she could, learning everything he showed her. Late one afternoon, Grey Wolf knelt beside a beam that would sit above the doorway. He took out his knife and began carving. Clara leaned in. It was a bird. A sparrow, wings tucked, eyes alert. For the roof, he said, so it knows who lives below it. Her throat tightened. Is that for me? You are the sparrow, he said. Small does not mean weak. Sparrow flies when others sink. Clara reached out and touched the carving. Thank you. But peace didn't last long. The next day she saw Amos Lang riding near her land. His eyes followed the shape of the rising cabin. He turned his horse without speaking and rode toward town. A cold feeling seeped into Clara's stomach. The next morning a scrap of burlap was nailed to her liento, written in charcoal. No white girl who loves Indians is welcome. Clara stared at it, then tore it down with steady hands. Grey Wolf arrived moments later. She handed him the scrap. He read it, said nothing, then tossed it into the fire pit. The burlap curled and blackened. Wood does not ask skin color, he said. It only asks whose hands built me. Quote. Clara looked at him, then at the half-built cabin. I want to finish it, she said. Grey Wolf nodded. Then we do. But by midday the dust began to rise in the south. 6 riders approached, Sheriff Beck at the front, the Keene brothers, Amos Lang, and 3 other men with hard eyes. Grey Wolf stood beside the woodpile, axe in hand. Miss Winn, Sheriff Beck called. We need to talk. Clara stepped forward with her heart pounding in her throat. "What is it, Sheriff?" "We had a report of stolen horses last week," Beck said. "Witnesses say a tall Indian was seen riding through the southern trail. Matches this one's description." He nodded toward Grey Wolf. "You vouch for him?" Clara met his gaze straight on. "Yes, he's been here, every day." "You got proof?" "You got proof he didn't?" she asked. "Or is it enough that he's Comanche?" A tense silence rippled through the group. Hoofbeats sounded again. A lone rider approached. Matilda Everdine. She dismounted and held up a folded paper. "The Jenkins Ranch found their horses this morning," she said. "No theft. They wandered off during the storm." The sheriff read it, sighed, and turned to the angry group behind him. "No crime here." But Amos Lang wasn't finished. "He bewitched her," Amos snarled. "Got her building some kind of tribe spell house." Clara stepped forward, fire in her voice. "That savage built me a home stronger than any man in this town ever offered." Silence. Real, heavy silence. The men turned their horses and rode off. Beck tipped his hat and followed. When the dust settled, Clara's knees went weak. Grey Wolf stepped closer and placed his hand on her shoulder. Not to guide, not to claim, just to steady her. Clara let out a breath she'd been holding for days. She was not alone. Not anymore. What if the home you built with your own hands became the place where your life finally began? The morning after Sheriff Beck and the townsmen rode away, Clara woke to a sound she didn't recognize. Soft voices, many of them. Not angry or harsh, just steady, purposeful, moving like a breeze over the land. She stepped out of her canvas shelter and froze. Half a dozen wagons lined the rise above her plot. Horses stood tied to rails. Men and women climbed down, carrying planks, baskets, crates, tools, and even a few blankets stitched with care. Children rushed around, gathering fallen twigs like they were helping in the most important job in the world. At the front of them all stood Matilda Everdine, her gray hair tucked beneath her wide-brim hat. "Good morning, Miss Winn," she called. "We have a house to finish, do we not?" Clara stared in disbelief. Her hands, still marked with yesterday's work, trembled slightly at her sides. She had expected gossip. Ridicule. Another round of whispers. Not this. Not help. Behind her, Grey Wolf stepped from the half-built doorway, axe still strapped to his back. His dark eyes scanned the crowd. His posture stayed steady, unreadable, but not hostile. Just watchful. Matilda's voice softened as she approached. "These folks aren't here to stare or judge. They came to help. And to give." One by one, the townspeople came forward. Mr. and Mrs. Miller brought a rocking chair and a cast-iron stove. The Cooper brothers carried glass windows, hinges, and nails. The Williams family brought jars of preserves, smoked meat, and a heavy wool quilt stitched by hand. Others brought lumber, tools, shingles, blankets, even a small sack of precious coffee beans. Clara's throat tightened as she took it all in. She had spent years believing she was alone. Too small, too useless, too easy to forget. But here they were, building with her, standing with her. Grey Wolf watched everything quietly. No pride, no distrust, just silent acceptance, as if he knew the world could offer kindness when it chose. Work began at once. Hammering filled the valley. Sawdust lifted like pale mist. Clara moved from task to task, hauling shingles, smoothing mud into cracks, and sweeping the floors. Her deer-hide gloves softened each blow, each lift, each grip. Grey Wolf worked beside the Coopers, hoisting beams alone that normally took two men. He carved joints with precision so perfect that others paused just to watch. Every movement he made told the story of someone who built not just structures, but meaning. By afternoon, the cabin had walls complete, a roof set tight, windows gleaming in the golden light. The stove was fitted. The chimney breathed thin curls of smoke into the sky. The door hung straight. The floor was swept clean. It was no longer a dream. It was a home. Clara stepped inside, the boards warm under her boots. Her breath wavered. She turned and found Grey Wolf standing at the doorway. In his hands he held a small bundle wrapped in soft, worn cloth. "For you," he said. Inside the bundle lay a silver bracelet, turquoise set into the metal, edge designs shaped into clouds and wind. On the inside, carved so delicately she almost missed it, was a small sparrow. Clara's breath caught. "Grey Wolf, I can't accept this. It must have belonged to someone." "It did," he said, voice low. "My wife. She wore it until the fever came. When she passed, I carried it so her strength remained with me." Clara hesitated, her heart heavy and full at the same time. "It's too precious." He shook his head. "It finds you now." The words washed through her like warm water. Hands trembling, she slipped the bracelet over her wrist. It fit as if shaped just for her. By sunset, the wagons rolled away. People waved, promising to visit. Matilda Everdine lingered longest. "You've made something real here," she said to Clara. Then she touched Grey Wolf's arm. "And you've honored what you set out to do." Grey Wolf bowed his head in respect. Matilda rode off as the sky turned to gold. Clara sat on the new porch step where the carving of the sparrow looked down at her. Grey Wolf lowered himself beside her, the quiet between them warm, steady. For the first time since she came to Dry Creek, Clara felt rooted. The next morning Grey Wolf stood before her, with the dawn glowing behind him. In his hand was the bracelet she still wore. "I must go," he said. "The council must hear of you, hear why you matter. In 7 days, if you still wear this, then we begin again." Clara swallowed. "I will wear it, every day." He dipped his head, eyes deep as the earth. Then he mounted his horse and rode north into the rising light. Silence settled behind him. But this time it wasn't loneliness. It was waiting. Clara walked to town later and found Reverend Miller at the church. Colored light poured through the stained glass, dust swirling in soft beams. "Reverend," she said, "I need your help. Grey Wolf and we wish to marry." He removed his glasses and sighed. "Clara, I cannot officiate such a match. The parish would revolt. My duty is to tradition." "I am sorry." Clara accepted it with quiet dignity, though disappointment ached deep. Outside, Mrs. Everdine swept the store porch. The older woman looked up. "Mrs. Everdine," Clara said, "we wish to marry. Reverend Miller refused. Would you?" The woman didn't even let her finish. "I built more than one frontier," she said. "If no one else will stand for love, then I will." Clara felt tears sting her eyes. "Thank you." The days passed slow but hopeful. Clara tended her garden. The turquoise bracelet caught the sun with every movement. Each day her heart steadied. Each day she waited. On the 7th dawn, hoofbeats approached. Soft, but sure. Grey Wolf returned. He stopped before her porch, his eyes lifted to her wrist. The bracelet still glowed against her skin. "It stayed," he murmured. "It stayed," she answered. He stepped forward and wrapped his arms around her, lifting her without effort. Her heart opened like a door. Later that morning, they climbed the rocky slope behind the cabin. Wind brushed through the pines. Grey Wolf opened a small pouch and painted 2 lines on her cheeks, red for life, black for protection, then painted the same on himself. They exchanged necklaces of bone and sinew. He spoke vows in his language. Clara repeated them softly, stumbling, but honest. Then they touched foreheads, breath mingling, hearts steady. By noon, they walked hand in hand into Dry Creek. People stopped, watched, whispered, but no one stepped forward to stop them. Inside Mrs. Everdine's home, chairs formed a half circle. Wildflowers filled jars. The older woman read vows of courage, partnership, endurance, and truth. She held their hands and declared them married. But Clara already felt married the moment Grey Wolf looked at her like she was equal. As dusk settled, they sat on their porch. The smell of pine drifted from the ridge. The stove inside crackled. The sky stretched wide above them. Clara leaned on his shoulder. "I was small once," she said softly. "Too small for them. But now I have a home built by someone who sees strength there." Grey Wolf touched the turquoise bracelet with gentle fingers. "You showed your worth, stone by stone, choice by choice. You are not small, you are my equal, my family." Night rose around them, calm and full. Storms would come, whispers would return. But none of that mattered. She was home, he was home, and together they would weather anything.